Thank you for joining us to talk more on Monday. This podcast was started to give a voice to More's mission of making opportunities reachable for everyone, and continues today as a way for us to share the mic with like-minded individuals with their own stories to share. Talking More has become our channel for history, mindsets, information you need, and featuring our interns who are learning how to share their voice. Join us on Patreon for our Masterclass with More, hosted by Bria Bradley, that she deep dives with experts on a host of topics key to building your business and legacy. You'll find our founder content hosted by our founder Ariana as part of our Masterclass, where business owners share lessons they've learned while in business. This Disability Advocacy Month, we highlight the importance of representation, access, and equity for disabled communities across the arts and beyond. I'm joined by actor, intimacy director, and disability advocate Olivia Mozzi to explore how lived experience shapes storytelling and challenges long-standing barriers to inclusion in performance spaces and cultural institutions. We'll also reflect on how disability advocacy continues to reshape conversations around access, visibility, and creative expression. Olivia Mozzi is an actor and intimacy director who strives to be an ambassador of equal opportunity. She was voted Best Performer in the 2022 Broadway World Indianapolis Awards for her role in Cost of Living with American Lives Theater. She was also the first visibly disabled actor to perform with Footlight musicals. Olivia has presented on disability rights and inclusion to audiences ranging from corporate groups all the way to kindergartners. All right, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You are not a first-time guest on the podcast. You were with us, I believe it was in 2024, and we talked, we just brushed the surface of what visibility and accessibility can look like in theater. But we're here today to dive deeper into that idea and to talk about what intimacy, coordination, and direction can look like, and what accessibility really means today, how important it is, and how we can continue to strive for more accessibility in all of our spaces. So my first question for you, when you first began working in the theater performance arena, what did you notice about accessibility or a lack of it in these spaces that you were entering?
Yeah, the main thing I would say, and this is not exclusive to performance spaces, but I think a lot of times we think about accessibility and historic preservation as being mutually exclusive, and they don't have to be. They put an elevator in the Colosseum in Rome, which is like 1900 years old.
Yeah.
So we can make it work.
There are ways.
Yeah.
That's really cool though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it opens up a whole opportunity for people who couldn't before to go see this amazing space.
For sure.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you have noticed about spaces, like, especially when it comes to having them ready? If you're coming into the space and they've already made preparations for you, or if you're having to ask for things.
I think as much as I would like to see every place be accessible, I think especially with the range of ages of theaters in particular in Indianapolis, and thinking about the range of disabilities, and that, what I need is going to be different with walking with crutches. What I need is going to be different from what a person who uses a wheelchair might need. And so it's not necessarily making sure that every part of your building is perfectly accessible, but it's more, is your staff ready to work with people with disabilities, to have those conversations of, this might not be set up perfectly for you, but we can still do what we can to make it as good of an experience for you as possible. And then potentially we also have bigger conversations about how do we make the space more accessible, what grants are available, that sort of thing. But in the immediate, I would say the more important part I would advocate for, and where I see the obstacles happening is those conversations and whether or not people are willing to have them.
Yeah. And they should be.
Yes.
It makes it a more inclusive and interesting world for all of us.
For sure, yeah.
In addition to performing, you're also an intimacy director, which is something that I feel like in my experience, I've only scratched the surface of, because not every show that includes intimacy has an intimacy director,
Sure.
unfortunately. Can you explain what intimacy direction is for somebody that may not work in the theater space and why it's so important?
Yeah. So intimacy direction grew out of fight direction. My friend and fellow intimacy director, Claire Wilcher, I've heard her describe it as you wouldn't give actors swords on day one and tell them to go figure it out. That would be dangerous.
Yeah.
So we are now starting to apply that same safety and structure to moments on stage when actors have intimate touch, intimate contact, and that can be something sexual, but it also doesn't have to be. It can be a moment of caregiving or, a close hug if you're having a reunion between friends, that sort of thing. But anything that involves close physical contact, we are choreographing that so that actors know what to expect, and so that it is serving the story, so that it looks realistic to the audience and that it is staying within actors' boundaries, because we're being intentional about collaborating with them on that to make sure that they, most importantly, feel safe.
Yeah. When I have had experience with intimacy direction, it's very much been like a, what are your green, yellow, red areas?
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Like, where is it always okay? Because, even if you choreograph a moment, it can change.
For sure.
That's the magic of live theater, right?
Yes.
But there are, places where if you might touch an actor, they could get taken completely out of the scene.
Exactly.
For whatever reasons they may have, right? So it's super important to know those boundaries, to have talked about them ahead of time, to make sure that both actors understand what those boundaries look like, so that the scene still remains what it was supposed to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I like that you say that it's choreographed and it's kind of the same thing as a fight, because I think intimacy direction has also kind of played a role. Like, I did a show recently where there was a slap involved between a couple, and it was kind of both. It's a little bit of a fight scene and it's a little bit of an intimacy scene.
Yes.
Because it's kind of working in that idea of like there's some domestic violence going on, so it feels like it crosses into both realms.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No, you're good. Yeah, it's definitely addressing both the physical safety and the emotional safety of actors, so that, like you said, they are able to stay in the moment and stay in character, because they know what's coming, as opposed to, oh, I didn't know they were going to touch me then or there, and now I'm thinking about my body instead of how I'm telling the story, and then
that's a terrible feeling.
Yes.
Like, you want to be able to be present in your body, not suddenly be thinking about something else.
For sure.
While you're on stage.
For sure, yeah. And I think there's a misconception that intimacy directors are like the fun police. And honestly, I've had friends and family come to shows, Rocky Horror being one of them, and say, did you actually set any boundaries with them? Because they seem to be having a very good time. And I said, that's kind of the point, because once people have a container to play in and they know what's expected, then they can just play.
Yeah.
And it looks realistic and it looks fun. And that's the beauty of it.
Right. And that's such a show that it's so high camp, that it can get out of hand.
Yeah.
So you better know what's right and what's not.
Yes, exactly.
So, as an actor and an intimacy director, how has some of your lived experience shaped the way that you approach this storytelling that you're doing in real time, the character work that actors are doing, and representation on stage, whatever that may mean?
I have been fortunate to play both characters that were disabled, specifically named in the script, and that experience was part of the play, and to simply be a disabled actor playing a character. And so I think I am able to bring both of those experiences, and I've been fortunate to work with directors. We worked, so I was in a play called Cost of Living, and I played a woman who became quadriplegic after a car accident. And she has just gotten home from rehab, and her ex-husband shows up who hasn't been in the picture while she's been in rehab, but suddenly wants to take care of her. And as you can imagine, she's not too pleased about that.
Yeah.
And the other, so there are two disabled characters in play. The other character has cerebral palsy, which I have in real life. And I will always remember a scene where that character has a spasm on stage. And it's me and our director, Chris Saunders, sitting in the audience and talking to Preston Dildine, our actor, and saying, okay, what if you tried this? What if you just splayed with your arms? What if you just splayed, like trying to figure out how to make this spasm visible enough that it, is visible from like the back row of the theater, but also not a caricature of what a spasm is. And since I have them, Chris kind of enlisted me of, can you help us make this look good?
Yeah.
Which is something I never would have expected would have come in handy for theater. So,
right.
Yeah, that's just one example.
Yeah, but I think it's so important because, like you said, if it becomes a caricature, suddenly it's something that they probably never intended and shouldn't be on stage.
Yeah, and that playwright, Martina Mayock, was very intentional. I mean, in the script it says, please cast disabled actors in these roles, because she, I believe, has firsthand experience as a caregiver of people with disabilities, and so she understands that experience is going to be very different coming from the voice of an actual disabled person as opposed to someone who is pretending.
Right.
And so we were then able to kind of weave that voice into every part of the show.
Yeah, and play such a delicate balance of making sure that it's obvious what's happening, but the people in the front row aren't like,
right.
Oh.
That would never happen. Yeah.
Right. You have broken ground as one of the first visibly disabled actors to perform with Footlight musicals. What did that moment represent for you personally? And what do you think it signaled to the broader theater community?
So for me, the idea of representation is really important. I did not really have disabled role models, especially in theater, until I was in my 20s. So the idea that anyone, especially perhaps someone younger, could come to the show and see me and perhaps think that they could do that too was really meaningful to me. And, disability is the only minority group that anyone can become a part of at any time. And I remember in particular a conversation with a patron after Bright Star. She told me about her father, who had been involved with theater when he was younger, and then as he got older, he started to use a wheelchair, and at that point he had kind of counted himself out of performing. And she told me that she wished he could have seen this production and me on stage and known that using a wheelchair and performing can go together. It's possible to do both. So that was really special too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Representation is so important. We know that, right?
Yes.
Getting to see a version of yourself doing something you didn't think that you could do opens those doors.
For sure. And I think too, it was important for people to see that at a place like Footlight, which is an all volunteer community theater. The stories that we tend to hear are about the people who are in movies or on Broadway. And, that's hugely important as well. But I don't want people to think that it can only happen in, movie studios or Broadway theaters that perhaps have more resources and more money. It can absolutely happen, in your community with volunteers who are just figuring it out together.
Right. Yeah. I really applaud some of these community theaters that have embraced the idea of universal design and just figuring out ways to incorporate people, whether the character is labeled as disabled or not, right? You can have any kind of musical where somebody has a disability and is just part of the story. And maybe it's not even addressed. They're just there. Yeah. Because that's what life is. There are disabled people in your spaces, in your lives, and they should exist without it necessarily being a plot point. Yeah. I think both are super important.
I agree. Yeah, for sure.
In your view, what are some of the most common misconceptions about disability representation that are happening in the arts?
I think there is more understanding of the importance of disabled actors playing disabled characters. I think there is nuance to the disability experience that goes beyond just using a mobility aid, and not every even physical disability requires you to use a mobility aid. So that's why it's so important to cast disabled actors as disabled characters, because we bring a depth of lived experience that is going to be so much richer to that storytelling than someone who has just learned how to walk with crutches or to use a wheelchair for a role. Even if you're not playing your exact disability, there is often enough overlap that you can say, oh, I've had something similar happen, or I've been through, I've had someone say something like that to me, and I can use that to inform what my character is doing.
Yeah. Did you find that happening when you played a quadriplegic character in Cost of Living?
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah, for sure.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's very true that there's a lot of crossover and applicable things, whether it's a physical or a mental disability.
Mm-hmm.
People with labels oftentimes are checking a lot of boxes that other people are checking too.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is why we, you see a lot of recognition. Like people with ADHD will hear something about like somebody with autism and they're like, well, that happens to me too.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it does, because a lot of how this presents is so similar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You definitely see that with physical disabilities as well. I have friends with cerebral palsy who have common experiences, but I also have friends with other disabilities or who may or may not use mobility aids, but we have definitely faced some of the same barriers and can relate in that way.
Yeah, that's really special. How does intimacy direction intersect with disability advocacy in ways that people might not immediately think about?
Both ask us to slow down and be more intentional, which in our culture, I think we are especially not accustomed to.
Yeah.
And it's not even necessarily taking things at a slower pace, but it's allowing for conversations about what the actor in if you're talking specifically in the theater space, what the actor needs, and not just plowing through the rehearsal schedule as planned, but saying, okay, if you are in an intimate scene that has a costume of nudity, for example, if I'm intimacy directing that, I'm going to offer additional rehearsal time if the person wants to come in maybe a little bit earlier before the first time that we plan to run it as part of the show. If they just want to run it in costume, with only directors in the room, with a little bit more time to get used to how that feels. And that, giving extra space for something like that is just, you don't see that happening in a lot of spaces, maybe ever, now that I'm thinking about it. So giving that extra time for just a little bit more intention behind what we're doing. And I think both intimacy direction and advocacy really give agency to individuals. If you are advocating for yourself as a disabled person, you are the expert in what you need. No one is going to know that better than you do. It doesn't matter what the setup of the building is. It doesn't matter how close the other person is to you. Like you ultimately are the expert. And I think intimacy direction does the same in that, I tell actors, if you set a boundary and you want to give me additional context around that boundary, if that would be helpful to you so I can support you, I welcome that, but I'm never going to ask them to justify a boundary. You know, I trust that if you come to me and you say, I'm not comfortable with XYZ, I'm going to say, great, we will change that and we will figure it out, and I will let you know like what we'll do differently.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing that I've noticed.
Yeah, and there doesn't need to be a reason.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, but I think people, I like to say that I spend, as an intimacy director, I spend part of my time teaching people how to set boundaries, and then I spend the rest of the time reassuring them that it's in fact okay to set those boundaries.
Yeah.
Because we suck at setting boundaries as a society.
Yeah. We're still learning that one big time.
Yeah. And you know, and then I come in and I tell them it's okay, you can set all kinds of boundaries, and they're like, are you sure? and you know, it might be one of the first times that they set a boundary that's actually respected and reinforced by someone who isn't them, right? Like, I'm there to be a liaison between actors and the production team, and to ultimately be an advocate for those actors. And to figure out, you know, how do we work within boundaries in a way that still honors the story and tells it the way we want to tell it. But yeah, I think in a lot of spaces, people don't even broach the idea of setting a boundary because they're afraid of the repercussions.
Yeah. And I think that argues a bigger point that this, you know, we've been talking about the theater space, but it should be happening in more places. It should be encouraged in the workplace, in homes, in, you know, education, so that that's not the first time that they're setting a boundary, and it's respected without question, without judgment. So that if they're in another space and they're uncomfortable, they know how to deal with it. And they can set a boundary, no questions asked, and it's, whether it's respected or not, they know that they have done what they need to do, you know? And I think that's true of any kind of advocacy that you're doing for yourself. Yeah. It's so important to flex those muscles.
Yeah, my hope is absolutely that the actors that I work with are able to take intimacy direction not only to other productions that they work on, whether or not there's an intimacy director involved, you can still apply some of those same principles to the process and help set some boundaries for people, but also, that it's helpful to them in everyday life as well, and that maybe they apply it more widely of, you know, now I know how it feels to have this boundary in a theater setting, and like how that helped my performance. Where else can I be setting boundaries that helps my performance in life?
Yeah, that's so true. It does feel like that sometimes. Yeah, that we're having to put on a bit of a facade.
Yes,
just to get through the day.
Yeah.
Where do you still see some of the biggest structural barriers for artists with disabilities, whether it's in casting, training people to have those conversations early and have them well, rehearsal processes, or just the infrastructure of the production or the theater itself?
I think the main boundary, or the main obstacle, I guess would be bad to talk about boundaries is a bad thing. The main obstacle that I see is, I think it's attitudinal, and then it bleeds into that infrastructure. So ideally, I see a lot of theaters that have, as they should, statements on their website about, we welcome, you know, auditioners of all sizes, all abilities, all races, and that's fantastic. And if you're going to have a statement like that, what is the other work that you're doing to actually prepare for those individuals? And I think what people don't realize about working with people with disabilities is that inclusion isn't rocket science, but it does require intentionality and another layer of discussions and consideration, and you need to be prepared for that, and to have that happen throughout your production process and with everyone who's involved. It might impact costuming, it might impact set design, it might impact the tech crew and where they're putting things backstage so that people can get around. And so what I would love to see more theaters do is to prepare for those disabled actors that you want to have on your stage before they even show up to audition. And granted, if someone shows up to an audition and you say, oh, I hadn't thought about casting someone in a wheelchair, but they're fantastic and let's do it. You still need to be prepared for, it's not just a one and done. It's going to be an ongoing conversation with that person to make sure that they have a good experience. And so what are you doing as a director, producer, costumer, whatever your role might be, to educate yourself not only about disability, but we're at a point where there are people who are doing the work not only on Broadway but in Indianapolis. And so who are those people that you can lean on as resources? Because also ultimately, if you cast an actor, you're casting them to do the work to be in your show, right? And they're going to advocate for themselves and what they need. But you're not hiring them to be a disability, to be an access consultant for the show.
They should get to show up and just do rehearsal like anybody else.
Yes. And again, of course, I want to keep that line of dialogue open of what do you need, and oh, this isn't working, so let's switch this up. But they shouldn't be your resource, and they shouldn't have to come to you with every single thing that they need or that isn't working. And so, who are the resources in your community? Are there people who are access consultants? Who are the people in your community who have already worked with disabled actors who can be a resource for you? So if you get stuck of, I'm not sure how to do this, or I'm feeling even a little bit over my head, like, I get it. Disability can be intimidating, especially if you have not had the experience of having someone with a disability in your daily life. Or maybe you have, and then an actor shows up who has a completely different disability, and so you're working with a completely different set of access needs. But just the willingness to have those conversations and to have that follow through. The experiences that I've had on stage that have been the most positive, that intention has been there from not even auditions, even talking about auditions, right? Because a lot of times I'll reach out and I'll say, hey, I'm going to show up with the disability. Right, I'm going to show up and do this dance in a wheelchair. Like, how do you want me to approach that in an audition setting? But that intention, and this is me, just speaking from my experience, like I don't know what kind of conversations were happening on the other side, but I can confidently say that conversations were happening because of the experience that I was receiving, from audition to closing.
It makes me think too that, having ththose conversations in advance, knowing what you might expect when you ask people to come to your auditions. There's a theater in my hometown that cast someone in a wheelchair for a production that they were doing, and then they realized in their space that he had to go like all the way to the other end of the building and take some elevator all the way up and get all the way back to get to the green room instead of just taking the stairs that went right to the green room. And they were surprised by this. They hadn't thought about the simple fact of him just getting to a place, that everyone else was going to be waiting to do the show was going to be like this whole production of itself. So if they had like previous conversations like, hey, how are the actors going to get to the space where they're waiting before the show, they might have had a conversation with him, like, is this okay? Or they would have figured something else out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was an unpleasant surprise.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, there are things that you can anticipate and you can prepare as much as you can, and there are still going to be things that pop up because the nature of disability is unpredictable. Like, I don't even always know what I'm going to need. It might depend on how hot it is that day or how much sleep I got the night before or any myriad of things. But you can tell when you're in an environment where people are open to that, and there's not a knee-jerk reaction of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But it's, again, trusting that person is the expert on what they need and that you can figure things out. We, in Bright Star, and shout out to Isaac Becker-Chamberlain, our director, for leading that team, because it truly was, everyone from director to tech crew to costumers was on board with making it a great experience from an accessibility and inclusion standpoint. But we had a bunch of huge set pieces, houses that were going on and off stage. And when we first started working with those, luckily we started working with them pretty far ahead in the rehearsal process because we knew it was going to be a dance and how to get them on stage and that sort of thing, and who was responsible, because actors were also helping move a lot of things.
Yeah, and those wing spaces can be tight.
Yes. Well, and I was performing in a sports wheelchair, and there was one point in rehearsal where I was truly stuck behind a set piece.
Right.
and so our stage manager, Jeremy Crouch, wonderful human, and our stage crew not only spiked places for every set piece on stage. So for those who aren't in theater, spiking is where you put like very visible tape on the stage so that a set piece is being put in the same place every night so that it's not, messing up choreography or things like that. Again, people know what to expect.
Right.
So they ended up not only doing that on stage for those big set pieces, but also backstage, because we figured, okay, even if this house comes a half an inch further into the wing, I cannot get to where I need to go.
Yep.
Once they spiked it, just everybody knew, and I could get around, and everybody else could get around as well, but I was never stuck. And that was something that, I never would have come in and said, oh, and by the way, we need to also talk about where the set pieces are backstage. But again, there was a moment of panic of, oh my gosh, I can't get to where I need to go. But then we figured it out, and then it was, smooth sailing from there.
Also, it's such a small world because I know Isaac. We performed in a show together, probably, 12, 13 years ago now in Fort Wayne.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love the theater community. Final question for you. What recommendations would you give to theaters that want to be more inclusive of actors with disabilities?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that intentionality and the preparation that you are doing before a disabled actor even walks through the door. So what is your theater community doing to educate themselves about disability, and what a disabled person might need? What resources are you identifying either in your theater community or in the larger community that you can lean on? So, no one's expecting you to know it all from the beginning. No one's expecting you to be perfect, but who are the people that you can lean on who have lived experience with a disability or who have worked with disabled actors, or what are the theaters, in your area that are doing this well that you can lean on in those moments where you're not sure what to do and you may not feel comfortable going to the actor. I've talked to access consultants who have worked at Indiana Repertory Theater, for example, and they said that a lot of what their job is talking with everyone else on the people on the team, whether it's another actor or the director, will come to them and say, I want to ask our disabled actor this, or I want to approach this conversation. can I do that? And if so, how do I do it in a respectful way? So I think people just want, a lot of that is just reassuring them that, yeah, you can have those conversations. And of course, yes, you want to do it in a respectful way.
Yeah.
But I think even the fact that you're thinking about how to have it in a respectful way,
It's a great start.
You're not going to screw that up. And even just having the conversation, like so many people just don't, tiptoe around the conversation. And with disability and inclusion, I think inaction is worse than doing the wrong thing, because inaction can still result in exclusion, as much as specifically, I think the exclusion happens more because people aren't sure what to do and they don't follow through, rather than having malicious intent.
Right.
So I think that's why that education piece is really important of, okay, on paper we say that we welcome people with disabilities, and we recognize that there's a learning curve if you haven't worked with actors with disabilities. So how are we equipping our teams across the theater to feel like they have a baseline and that they're allowed to have conversations and ask questions and not know it all, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah. And at least they're trying.
Yes.
They're doing something rather than nothing.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I think you have such amazing insight into so many of the different aspects. There's so much that goes into putting a production together and how it can really draw on so much of the lives that we're living outside of it as well. And I love that insight, and I hope that theaters continue to take it to heart and at least try to do better than they did the day before.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me. I so appreciate you coming back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
I'm so glad you agreed. And thank you guys for listening. We so appreciate our more audience. Make sure to check out our Patreon as well and pick up your copy of issue 12. Make sure to check out moremagazine.org for all of our wonderful resources and guests and things that we're doing behind the scenes. And we will see you next time for another wonderful episode. Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.